Lyon. At the confluence of the rivers Rhône and Saône, today it's one of France's largest urban areas. A crossroads chosen by Rome to establish its first colony in Gaul, here on the Fourvière Hill. Lugdunum was the showcase for Rome in Gaul. That's why the city was endowed with all the buildings and facilities worthy of any Roman metropolis. Its forum, circus, amphitheater, Odeon, and most importantly, its theater, one of the first buildings to be constructed. Today, it's the most impressive of all the remains of ancient Lugdunum. Remains that were long forgotten, but which are now a reminder of the former glory of a city that was none other than the capital of the Gauls.
It was a large city and given preferential treatment by the Roman authorities as soon as they founded it. So it became the very example of a Romanized town, with the full panoply of typical Roman monuments.
Its development was important because it was supposed to represent the Romanization of all the recently annexed Gauls.
Why did the Romans decide to make Lyon so monumental? And how were its monuments constructed? To answer these questions, we must go back to the founding of Lugdunum. The history of Lugdunum began in Vienne, in Gaul, in 44 BC. A few years after Caesar's conquests, it was there that the Roman veterans of his legions were temporarily installed. Romans that a band of rebel Gauls were determined to kick out. The Republic of Rome appointed one man to find these veterans and their families a refuge. The governor of Gaul, Lucius Munatius Plancus. His task? To found a colony, the first in these newly conquered lands. Plancus decided that the colony would lie 30 kilometers to the north of the Roman town of Vienna, today's Vienne, at the confluence of two rivers, the Rhône and the Saône, a strategic crossroads at the extremity of Transalpine Gaul, already under Roman control.
He had to control this crossroads, which gave fast and easy access to the northern provinces by river.
The Romans called northern Gaul Gallia Comata, which means hairy Gaul, because that was where the people were considered to be a bit more barbarous than in the south. And so Lyon was the transition point between the civilized south and the north.
'43 BC. Lucius Munatius Plancus founded his new city. The colony was given defensive walls and a right-angled layout typical of Roman cities, with its cardo, the north-south road, and decumanus, the east-west road.
This allowed them to organize circulation inside the city, and it dictated the sites of the public spaces, like the forum and the surrounding dwellings.
But how did they lay out the right angles that would shape the new city? Roman surveyors used an ingenious topographical tool called a groma. The principle was simple. At the top of a pole planted in the ground, two perpendicular arms with plumb lines at the ends.
You line up the strings until one hides the other, which means you have a straight line. Then I move my string and line it up with the other perpendicular plumb line. Then I can trace the second perpendicular line. It was a very good system and pretty precise.
It was on this basis of right angles that Lyon was laid out and began to grow. But the city was yet to be given its first known monument, the theater. With its 108-meter diameter and height of 30 meters, this gigantic structure stood out from the entire cityscape.
It was a political symbol of Rome, the power of Rome and the civilization of Rome.
In Roman cities, the theatre stood out architecturally as a showcase for Rome, but also for its dimensions and the huge number of people it could seat.
This architectural giant could seat 10,000 people, 5 times more than the Paris Opera House. It comprised a stage at the foot of an ornate sculpted and decorated backdrop wall. Facing it were 3 seating sections. Below them, the orchestra, reserved for the most prestigious spectators, such as the emperor and the notables of the city. To what do we owe its existence? To what principles was it constructed, and with which materials? To find out, we need to go back to one of the most important moments in the history of Rome. '27 BC. After almost 20 years of political instability and civil war, the Republic of Rome became an empire under Julius Caesar's nephew, Augustus. A man who would weigh like no other on the fate of the Roman colony.
In a way, Augustus was the main figure in the history of the Roman Empire, because he was the one who first imposed the system of dynastic governance. What he put in place would define the next 400 years of Roman history.
Augustus reorganized the empire and divided northern Gaul into 3 Gauls. Gallia Belgica, with its capital Durocotorum, today's Reims, Gallia Aquitania, with its capital Mediolanum Santonum, today's Saintes, and the largest, Gallia Lugdunensis, with its capital Lugdunum, Lyon. Augustus would give Lugdunum a special place by placing it at the heart of the new Gallic road system.
This was a very important political move, making Lyon the heart of the road system, but also of the military and economic system of the 3 Gauls.
Within the empire, Lugdunum now enjoyed a unique status. But here, as in Rome, Augustus needed to impose adhesion to his new imperial ideology. To do so, he would rely on the only mass media available in antiquity, the theater.
The theatre was a genuine propaganda tool regarding the relationship of Lyon to Rome and, in a more general sense, of Gaul to Rome.
It was during the reign of Augustus that the first theater was constructed between 20 and 10 BC. It then culminated at the height of the first section of seating and numbered 4,000 places. A century later, its capacity would be increased to 10,000. And yet, like in the rest of Lyon, this monument had totally vanished from the cityscape.
In the 19th century, all that was visible was a semicircular section of the Odeon Wall. All the remains you see now had been buried. You have to imagine the site covered with vineyards and pasture, with the theatre buried beneath several meters of earth and rubble.
It wasn't until the early 1930s that the Great Theatre of Lyon was discovered after a series of important excavations. Excavations the like of which Lyon would never see again. They unearthed the original structure, that of a type of edifice never constructed before in Gaul. And the shape of the theater was due to its purpose. Because here, everything was based on one need: acoustics.
It's like dropping a stone into a pond. The waves radiate out in circles. The same with sound. So it was imperative that the theater was semicircular.
So how does it work? From the stage, the sound made by the actors is transmitted directly to the spectators. The constant slope of the seating allows for this transmission without any obstacles. The most surprising thing is the role of the smooth paving in the orchestra.
If the actors spoke at the floor of the orchestra, the flat part in front of the stage, the sound bounced off it. And as it was quite close, the direct sound and reflected sound combined, thus increasing the volume. That also meant that the theater had to be of limited size, because if you were too far away, the sound and image would become out of sync.
There are no records to show who ordered the construction of this monument. And as is often the case with Roman edifices, we don't know the name of the architects.
The reason we don't know the names of architects is that they were not really considered to be very important people. They might even be slaves.
And yet, they were particularly ingenious, beginning with their choice of location for the theater.
There's a meaning behind the topographical location, pointing directly at Italy towards the rising sun. That's why this site was chosen. Etymologically, Lugdunum means hill of light, and the theatre plays on this name.
The theatre was undoubtedly the biggest building up on the hill, the biggest in surface area and the biggest in height. So you couldn't help but see it standing out from the landscape. It was colossal.
While the architects chose this site to emphasize the monumental nature of the theater, they also made considerable gains by avoiding unnecessary work.
By building the theater into the hillside, they made a lot of savings on a large part of the structure. The theater simply backed onto the hill with no need to construct all the rear sections like on flat land.
They did have to excavate the hill, however, to make room for the theatre, which allowed them to recuperate building materials. The excavated part of the site served as a quarry to supply the construction of the theatre itself.
The Roman builders set the lower part of the seating directly on the hillside. But when the theater was enlarged, it was impossible to proceed in the same way for the upper seating. So what did they use for support? Their answer was an invention of engineering genius, the so-called hollow structure.
This technique was invented in Italy and employed since the 2nd century BC. It's known as hollow structure. The walls fan out and are joined together by vaults. And these vaults supported the seating.
As astonishing as it may seem, the vast majority of this limestone seating therefore rests on empty space. Space created by self-supporting semicircular vaults.
The Roman invention of stone arches and vaults marked the advent of what we could call modern architecture, with large halls and spacious interiors, which weren't possible before that, when wall spans were limited by the size of the stone blocks.
There are still traces of these revolutionary vaults among the remains of the theater.
I'm standing in one of the theatre's vaults. Their purpose was to support the masonry on which the large limestone blocks that form the seating were placed.
This masonry was composed of one of the strongest and most malleable construction materials ever invented, Roman concrete. A mixture of lime mortar and rubble stone found on site. This concrete would form the skeleton, the main structure of the Grand Theatre.
The advantage was, once the mortar had set, The wall was the equivalent of a single block, a monolith, a mass of set cement. It was incredibly solid compared to a brick wall which could crack. These walls were formidable.
It allowed them to build high, increase solidity, spread the forces exerted by the edifice, save on materials, and thus free themselves from the natural topography of the construction site.
The widespread use of this extraordinary invention was a direct consequence of the Roman conquests in the last 2 centuries before our era. Notably the capture of Carthage from Hannibal. Then that of Corinth in Greece. With these conquests, the Roman Republic would inherit thousands and thousands of slaves.
Rome inherited a huge workforce. And what would it do? Cut lots of small plain blocks. Nothing beautiful or ornamental, just small blocks. Go on, go cut me some blocks. It was non-specialized labor.
Small blocks, more small blocks, even more small blocks. The genius behind the Theatre of Lyon was the combination of the hollow structure with the incredible material that was Roman concrete. To build the edifice, the workers first erected the cladding of the straight piles for the vaults. Inside, they poured the Roman concrete made of lime mortar and rubble stone obtained on the site. These piles then served as supports for the centering, on which the arches of the vaults would also be set in concrete.
Once set, they removed the wooden centering through small openings so it could be used again. The aim was to recycle the construction materials.
Above this concrete structure, the theatre was given a bright white covering of limestone blocks.
The construction of the theatre must have been a massive job, made even harder by the gradient of the hill. Most of the blocks arrived by water, but then they had to be hoisted up the hill. And this limestone has a density of 7, which means that 1 cubic meter weighs almost 3 tons.
The reason Roman theatres, like the one in Lyon, were so numerous and imposing was because they served the imperial power. In this showcase of Rome, where plays, fables, and mimes were performed, the spectators were seated according to social ranking. Senators and city notables in the orchestra and seats nearest to the stage, while citizens, plebes, freemen, and slaves filled the less prestigious places higher up.
Augustus wanted inequality. He didn't want people having the same status. That way, it was he who held the keys to social promotion. And for his system to work correctly, there needed to be rungs of a ladder to climb.
Inside the theatre, one feature embodied the power of the emperor, the stage wall, worthy of a palace. More than 30 meters high, 3 superimpositions of the different architectural orders, and numerous niches containing statues of the gods, but also those of the emperor and his family. All that remains of this sumptuous wall today are a few bases and parts of the marble columns.
One of the theatre's roles was to arouse wonderment, and the decoration was part of this magic, because you were entering a different world, filled with pomp, the gods, the emperor, the imperial family, and important figures of the city.
This theatre, one of the most beautiful monuments of Gaul, still bears witness to its former pomp. The walls carry the traces of the marble cladding that covered them 2,000 years ago. But where's the rest of the monument? How could such an edifice fall into such ruin? And why was it dismantled? At the top of the theatre is an unusual block of limestone.
This block has 2 characteristics: an unusual decoration on the front and sides, and on the top, a hole with a diameter about 30 centimeters. This hole was made to hold a wooden pole.
This block tells us that the Lyon Theatre once had a velarium, a system of ropes and canvas awning that sheltered the spectators from the sun.
Unfurling the velarium was part of the show. The spectators were wowed by the technological prowess. What's more, it involved them in the show, because the awning of the velarium was coloured, and these colours reflected down onto the characters in the play.
Another of these characteristic blocks was discovered in a nearby Christian burial site, where it had been reused as a sarcophagus.
This block is extremely interesting because it has the same decoration as the block that was part of the theatre's velarium. This block was certainly reused as a sarcophagus after the semicircular theatre wall had been dismantled to use the materials for other purposes. Sadly, we don't have a precise date, but the sarcophagus was probably made in the late 4th, 5th or 6th centuries, which is the only clue we have to the dismantling of the theatre.
Although we do not know the exact date of the dismantling of the Theatre of Lyon, it is certain that it ended up as a quarry for the heirs of its original builders.